Hi, I'm Dr. Ricky Little, professor of music at Union College in Lincoln, Nebraska, and this is part 3 of Who's Rockin' the House? Music of the World and the World of the Church. In part 2, we looked at the design and function of music, associations made with music, the moral influence of music on people, merging or creating a marriage with our music, and we began to trace the history of secular music being used in the church. In part 3, we will continue to examine this history. In the late 19th century, the Salvation Army incorporated secular pop tunes in their ministry. This is a narrative of that history. Salvationists adapted various musical styles and tunes to their own purposes. Booth, their founder, favored the brass band because of its potency as a current form of popular music. It was one of the ways he harnessed popular culture to his cause. He was quick to appreciate the value of good, rousing songs at his meetings. In 1876, he published Revival Music, a collection of well-loved hymns and choruses for use at the Christian Mission. And 3 years later, this was reissued as the first Salvation Army songbook. Nevertheless, Booth was dissatisfied with such tunes, as they were too solemn for his ear. As early as 1867, he surprised the fallow Salvationists by singing "Oh, How I Love Jesus" to a minstrel tune. The Army took dozens of music hall songs and wrote new lyrics for them. These tunes were well known and easy to sing. So in short, Booth wanted to appeal to the masses with the popular music of his day to draw them to his cause. He thought that the religious songs of his day were too solemn. In 1884, a correspondent wrote that music in the eye of the Salvation Army is primarily a bait to catch the common throng and bring them to the Army services. The advantages of using these popular melodies are obvious. First, they are ear-catching tunes. Their popularity proves that. Then the people know them already. They have been whistling them in the streets, hearing them sung at the music halls, or churned out of barrel organs. What the Army wants is that the common folk who crowd their barracks and halls shall listen and sing, and the battle is half won. These early adaptations of popular music engaged the Army with the popular culture of the day, and the brass band was his chosen method of making this music, and the brass band was extremely popular during this time. Now let's take a look at gospel music. Let's fast forward to the 20th century. In the world of gospel music, the gentleman who is considered to be the father of gospel music is Thomas Dorsey, a blues pianist and prolific composer. Under the name Georgia Tom, he performed with blues artist Ma Rainey and her Wildcats Jazz Band. During the early 1930s, Mr. Dorsey created gospel music, which married secular blues to a sacred text. He wrote over 400 compositions, but it is for "Take My Hand, Precious Lord" that he is best known. Dorsey began developing a sacred music based on the secular blues. It featured syncopated notes in an 8-bar blues structure. Dorsey dubbed his music gospel blues due to the similarity of his gospel rhythms and vocals to those heard in blues and jazz clubs. He also employed the call and response pattern in his songs, typically found in black churches. Dorsey brought his own ideas to church music. He insisted that the purpose of his music wasn't to tear down the traditional old line churches, but to dedicate his musical gifts to God. I wasn't trying to change it, church music, he said, but I was just struck with something that would change it over, something that God gave me. He accepted it. I got my authority from God. And Dorsey had experienced a life-changing event, or two life-changing events. He lost his wife and a child, and he was in and out of the songwriting business when it came to church. If he didn't have success, he would go back to playing the blues, and then something else would happen. He'd come back to the church, et cetera, and so it went. Let's consider next Sister Rosetta Tharpe. She was the first gospel superstar. She took gospel songs to the club, so she did the reverse. In 1939, Life magazine wrote this about her. Singer swings the same songs in church and nightclub. She was well loved in her sphere as a gospel singer in the church before she ever ventured into singing in the clubs. She actually signed a contract, and I don't think she really quite understood what she signed, but because of that, she had to sing whatever her manager told her she had to sing. So she did it. And so gospel music entered into the nightclubs. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, in writing about essential figures in the history of rock and roll, said this about Sister Rosetta Tharpe. If she had not been there as a model and inspiration, Elvis Presley, Little Richard, Johnny Cash, Jerry Lee Lewis, and other rock originators would have had different careers. No one deserves to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame more than she does. Since its inception, gospel music has continued to incorporate secular genres such as disco, rap, R&B, funk, and trap gospel. With the rise of gospel artist Kirk Franklin, gospel music went much further. It's kind of summed up in this quote taken from a recent article in Vibe. Quote, he, Kirk, didn't just aim for secular influence, but a full secular sound, with songs that sampled the Beastie Boys, Rufus, and Shaka Khan, LTD, the Jacksons, Tears for Fear, and even Scarface, remaking hits from the 80s, yeah, yeah, to make it sound so crazy, yeah, yeah, crazy for the Holy Spirit. It was kind of how parents blend vegetables into their kids' favorite dishes on the sneak, except with Jesus instead of broccoli. Franklin created gospel that not only moved you to praise and tears, but made you want to dance. Not just praise dance, dance in the club. Though affirmative in their viewpoint, these two articles will give you an overview of how gospel music has incorporated secular contemporary genres. They will trace the history, basically. And like I said, even though they agree in the affirmative that this is okay to bring funk and gospel and disco and trap into gospel music, it will give you an overview of what and when these things happen. Jazz. In 2015, JF Jazz published this article to commemorate a concert given by jazz icon Duke Ellington. Quote, 50 years ago, on September 16th, Duke Ellington filled the soaring Gothic nave of San Francisco's Grace Cathedral with the sublime and exultingly swinging sounds of his first concert of sacred music. Commissioned by the Episcopal Cathedral to help consecrate the new sanctuary, It was an offering to God in Ellington's expansive idiom that gave the composer the chance, as he put it, to say openly what I've been saying to myself on my knees. Ellington called his concerts the most important thing I have ever done. The critic Garrett Giddens characterized these concerts as Ellington bringing the Cotton Club Review to the church. Ebony magazine called the piece historic, situating it as part of a larger movement in the mid-60s that brought together jazz and religion. Strange Bedfellows. On the first Sunday in October of 1965, the Reverend John Garcia Gensel held the first jazz vespers at St. Peter's Lutheran Church in New York City as a jazz ministry to jazz musicians. Gensel said, "We're going to give the Lord some of the better sounds that emanate from New York City." As you can see from the titles of the next two articles, the movement has grown over the years with a myriad of reasons used as justification. Here are some of those reasons. Number one, celebrating jazz, a vibrant, creative, and cohesive force for spiritual nourishment and inclusive community. Number two, jazz expresses vibrant worship and visionary ministry. Number three, jazz, a spiritual force for community. 4, the honest music of jazz is made for the beauty of God. It gives people permission to be creative and gives them an opportunity to open up their souls. 5, jazz forms a community where the Spirit's presence can be felt. 6, jazz is another expression. It's just another way we can encounter God. 7, jazz is something that can bring them in and speak to them in a way that is totally different from classical music. And 8, the jazz ministry proclaims the gospel of Jesus Christ. I just have to say, I bet the founders of jazz had no idea that they were furthering the cause of Christ and the gospel ministry as they created jazz in the dance halls and whorehouses of New Orleans to entertain the men waiting their turn to have a communal experience with the prostitutes. What do you think Jelly Roll Morton would have said if someone had said to him, "Hey, Jelly Roll, one day in the future, ministers are going to use this jazz you were improvising for the whores to bump and grind to save sinners"? He probably would have said the same thing that Barrel House pianist Robert Shaw said: "If you think this music is for anything else except partying, you ain't got this music rightly understood." I had an experience once. I had the privilege of meeting Duke Ellington's younger sister, Ruth Ellington Boatwright. I was a student at The Ohio State University, and my teacher and I and some others were in New York going to see some operas. And Mr. Boatwright and his wife, Ruth, invited us to spend the day with them. The plan was to go to church with them. It was a Sunday. Then go to the Tavern on the Green, the iconic Tavern on the Green in New York. And then they were going to take us to see a show by Duke Ellington. I think it was Sophisticated Lady. Well, we were able to do everything but go to the show. The first thing we did was go to church. And we went to the Cathedral of St. John's the Divine in New York. And when we got there, the usher met us at the door, and the cathedral was jam-packed. Not a seat in the house. But being with Duke Ellington's sister, they made a seat. They took us up to the very front of the church, into the choir loft, where we could look right down into the place where the band was playing. And to my surprise, it wasn't sacred music that I knew of. It was some form of jazz. And that was my first experience actually hearing it in the church. And of course, it made me wonder, why are they playing jazz in the church? We'll talk more about that later. Rock and roll. The following are quotes documenting the rise of rock and roll in the church. The growing popularity of rock and roll music in the 1950s was initially dismissed by the church because it was believed to encourage sinfulness. Yet, as evangelical churches adapted to appeal to more people, the musical styles used in worship changed as well by adopting the sounds of this popular style. The genre became known as contemporary Christian music as a result of the Jesus movement revival in the latter 1960s and early 1970s, and was originally called Jesus music. It was during the 1970s Jesus movement that Christian music started to become an industry within itself. Jesus music started by playing instruments and singing songs about love and peace, and then translated into love of God. Paul Wohlegemuth, who wrote the book Rethinking Church Music, said, "The 1970s will see a marked acceptance of rock-influenced music in all levels of church music. The rock style will become more familiar to all people. Its rhythmic excesses will become refined, and its earlier secular associations will be less remembered." Larry Norman is often remembered as the father of Christian rock because of his early contributions before the Jesus movement to the developing new genre that mixed rock rhythms with the Christian messages. Though his style was not initially well received by many Christians in the Christian community of the time, he continued throughout his career to create controversial hard rock songs such as "Why Should the Devil Have All the Good Music?" Well, at least he gave the devil credit for it. Many people don't. He is remembered as the artist who first combined rock and roll with Christian lyrics in the Gospel Music Hall of Fame. In Mr. Norman's song, "Why Should the Devil Have All the Good Music?" the lyrics read, "I ain't knocking the hymns, just give me a song that has a beat. I ain't knocking the hymns, just give me a song that moves my feet. I don't like none of those funeral marches. I ain't dead yet." So much for exalted themes of glory. It sounds like he took a cue from John Philip Sousa. He wanted music for the feet instead of the heart. CCM became a wide and diverse collection of musical styles, too diverse to define. While channel surfing on a trip one evening, I came across a Christian program out of Chicago. I tuned in just in time to hear the speaker say, "And rock and roll is the most powerful music of this generation, and we are capturing it for Christ." This became even more evident to me one day when I heard Mark Farner giving an interview years ago on a Christian radio station. Mark Farner was lead guitarist of the highly popular rock group Grand Funk Railroad back in the 70s, and he had evidently become a Christian. I knew their music like the back of my hand. And there's not a rock and roller from back in the day that doesn't know this song. When Mr. Farner finished his interview, he proceeded to jam out to the song "Some Kinda Wonderful." The song is about a woman, and the lyrics go like this: "I don't need a whole lots of money. I don't need a big fine car. I got everything that a man could want. I got more than I could ask for. I don't have to run around. I don't have to stay out all night, 'cause I got a sweet loving woman, and she knows just how to treat me right. But my baby, she's all right. But my baby, she's clean out of sight. Don't you know that she's some kind of wonderful?" As Mark got down to the end of the first verse, he changed some words, and instead of singing about the woman, he began to sing about Jesus. 'Cause I got a sweet loving Savior like mine, and he knows how to treat me right. Well, my Jesus, he's all right. Well, my Jesus, he's clean out of sight. Don't you know that he's some kind of wonderful? There were no changes to the music itself, just the words. And as I listened, I said, man, this is a stretch as a former rock and roller myself. The name of the album from which this song came was called All the Girls in the World Beware. What he did with this song is exactly what was done with the song The Ash Grove that we reviewed earlier, and with many other secular songs over the past 500 years. Here are a few thoughts from some CCM artists using rock and roll for Jesus. Amy Grant, one of CCM's most successful artists, said, I want to play hardball in this business. I want to be on the same level professionally with performers in all areas of music. I love to hear Billy Joel, Kenny Loggins, and the Doobie Brothers. Why not? I aim to bridge the gap between Christian and pop. We are rock and roll evangelists, says drummer Robert Sweet, 24. Stryper is a modern-day John the Baptist crying in the world of rock for those who don't have the life of Christ to turn on the light switch. Our message is JESUS. Another quote, the people who buy my records like danceable modern music, but they don't want to feel guilty supporting music with trashy lyrics, says Steve Taylor, 27, who sings his own songs. Rock is associated with evil, but that is guilt by association. Music is music, and it is the vehicle of expression for my generation. Sort of the same thing they said about jazz. And program director Greg Faust said, our station offers an alternative to Prince and Madonna. We don't play trashy lyrics or tell dirty jokes. We give you fun and good, clean songs without hitting you over the head with the Bible. So as you can see, musicians have been bringing in the music of the world into the world of the church for hundreds of years. And with the evolution of recording devices, radio, television, and the recording industry, the trend has grown exponentially over the past 90 years and has slowly taken root in the Christian church. From genre to genre, the express reasons for doing so, for the most part, overlap, and though there is plenty of rationalization and proclamations as to why they did it, those who did it and support it fail to show any sound scriptural justification for or against the practice. Whenever a secular style of popular music was introduced, there was always some pushback from the establishment. It was true with gospel, it was true with rock. People voiced opposition to the introduction of this music as an appropriate form of worship. But as time went on and the music gained a foothold and a following in the churches, seemingly most opposition would die away over time as people were indoctrinated to the new sound. And it would become part of the norm. That is, until someone would push the envelope a little further and bring another hot secular style to church in the name of Jesus. As with the current controversial debut of trap gospel. Mass acceptance seems to never happen at once, which is congruent with the human experience. Another point that is never seriously raised by Christian proponents of this trend is the existence, plan, purpose, and interest that Satan would have in pushing this trend on the church. His name is typically only mentioned incredulously in the line, the devil's music, when referring to these secular forms. It makes light of the idea that Satan, if he exists, could possibly be behind the creation of any of this music. And Christian musicians who flood the market with this music Certainly don't give Satan the credit and for bringing it into the church. Ellen White writes about how Satan works through stealth and disguise over a period of time to effect change through his temptations. Satan does not enter with his array of temptations at once. He disguises these temptations with a semblance of good. He mingles some little improvement with the folly and amusement. Satan's hellish arts are masked. The beguiled souls take one step, then are prepared for the next. It is much more pleasant to follow the inclination of their own hearts than to stand on the defensive and resist the first insinuation of the wily foe, and thus shut out his incomings. Oh, what art, what skill, what cunning is exercised to lead the professed followers of Christ to a union with the world by seeking for happiness in the amusement of the world, under the delusion that some good is to be gained. And thus, the unguarded walk right into the net, faltering, flattering themselves that there is no evil in the way. All of these secular forms, rock, rap, country, blues, and all their children were designed to fulfill other functions. None were designed, conceived, inspired, nor developed for the express purpose or implied intent of worshiping God and bringing sinners closer to Christ. I believe that Satan has gradually led the Christian community to accept this music for worship, slowly re-educating the musical taste buds and transforming minds until we have what I call an unadulterated secularism in the church. Not just a piece, but the whole pie. This ends part 3. In part 4, we will examine the influence of the occult on these secular genres, secular and other associations made with this music, the non-neutrality of music, and double messages in our music. If you are interested in this series or in hosting a music seminar, please go to rickylittle.org for more information.